All right, let's talk about Lucy Letby. When we look at this note, not good enough. There are no words. I can't breathe. I can't focus. Overwhelming fear/panic. I haven't done anything wrong. Police interrogation, forget. Over here we have, I am an awful person. I pay every day for that. I'll never have children or marry. I'll never know what it is like to have a family. So densely packed. But let's focus for now on I haven't done anything wrong being up here, and I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough. And at the bottom, of course, I am evil. I did this. Taken in light of some other apparent contradictions, like the contrast between Lucy Letby's childlike and messy bedroom versus her fastidious and professional demeanor and appearance at work. But of course, most prominently, the contrast between the Lucy Letby that her friends and family thought they knew and the Lucy Letby against whom there is ample evidence of 7 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder, at least. Yeah, 7 counts of murder, 7 counts of attempted murder, guilty on all of those counts. All of this may make you wonder, is this a split personality? Does Lucy Letby have a split personality? I'll admit those words came into my head, particularly when I saw this note, because when I think of split personality, I'm thinking about sort of the most extreme form of compartmentalization. So compartmentalization means keeping boundaries between modes of yourself or parts of your mind, like for example keeping work at work. And it's something that I think in healthcare we're actually sort of almost taught you have to compartmentalize. You obviously don't want someone who's fraught with distress from something that happened yesterday when there's a code blue happening today. You have to be able to separate your emotions enough from your work and deal with that compartment when you can, right? And in more sort of benign forms, you probably act a little bit differently around your high school friends or your college friends versus, your boss. So compartmentalization is a normal thing. When this practice, though, becomes pathological, I would say, is when the parts of your mind and the modes of yourself stop even communicating, or lack integration. So the term split personality is a historical term. There's no single clear modern homologue to the historical idea of a split personality. There's dissociative identity disorder, which is a trauma-bound syndrome, essentially where dissociation was the adaptation to an acute traumatic event, and then there can be some residual dissociative states that are reemerge subsequently. I'm not really seeing that in this case, okay? There's also schizophrenia, which etymologically, schizophrenia means split or fragmented, phrenia, mind or soul. So split mind is actually what schizophrenia means. However, in that case, I would say the fragmentation is more so a thought disorder, if anything. Truly, the main pathological breakdown seems to be in the ability to differentiate self from non-self, right? So ascribing internal thoughts to external sources causes auditory hallucinations, perhaps. It's a different sort of pathological breakdown in the mind than this splitting phenomenon I'm talking about. But we do have borderline personality disorder, which has, as one of its hallmarks, splitting, right? So seeing the world as all good versus all bad, seeing things in black and white. Splitting is a classical trait of borderline personality disorder. But perhaps what's not talked about as often is the possibility that the process of splitting, the cognitive strategy of splitting, can be applied to one's own mind. So if there are parts of the mind that have to hold all of the bad aspects of the self, so that the parts of the mind that hold all of the good aspects of the self can be the place the person lives most of the time, you can end up in this situation where you see someone who seems to be perfectly pleasant, professional, and almost angelic, because that's the part of their mind that they're living in for the most part, and they've cast into the shadow the all bad parts of themselves. The all good, when they're in the all good version, they are only minimally aware that those bad parts exist. And so I propose that Lucy Letby has this kind of hypergraphia, right? This isn't the only note she wrote. You've possibly seen the others. This is a post-it note. She has whole sheets of paper as well that are filled up like this. All of these notes that I've seen have the appearance of almost vomiting out these parts of herself that I think she's trying to make sense of, because she can't hold them all in her head simultaneously. She can't hold the parts of herself that see herself as good with the shameful parts of herself simultaneously, and so she tries to get them out on paper to make sense of it. But what we see more so here is the shadow self coming out. There's another note that I'm not going to pull up, but a section which was scribbled and crossed out read, "I don't know if I killed them. Maybe I did. Maybe this is all down to me." So again, that idea that she's got part of herself split off from herself. I would say this is related to denial and avoidance. I do not actually believe she was completely unconscious of them, but that it was such an extreme form of denial during most of her life that she had these qualities, that she would only occasionally let them into her conscious awareness. So another place this comes up is when she was being arrested. So when Lucy Letby claimed that this was traumatic, or maybe even gave her PTSD, I certainly don't believe that it gave her PTSD. But her saying that the arrest was traumatizing, I'm gonna say, I think I know what she meant. What does trauma, when we say something is traumatizing, what does it feel like? I would say it feels like a combination of panic and a kind of burning emotional pain. In her case, what I think was traumatizing was not at all the arrest itself or the way the police were treating her or anything like that. What was traumatizing for her was that this was bringing up the parts of herself that she has been stuffing away in the shadows, that she's been denying, and it was confronting her otherwise conscious self with it, right? So usually her mask, the all good part of herself, that part of her mind that she lives in, was completely blocking out the shadow part of herself, which we'll get into, but was essentially a rageful baby murderer. Safe to say? But the good part of herself, the mask, does not want to acknowledge the shadow. When the police are coming to her door and arresting her, she cannot deny it any longer. It's bringing it into her real life, the fact that she did these things. And so she's traumatized by the shame that she has almost never confronted because it's been so split off. Incidentally, I don't think she should have been able to, I don't personally believe that she should have been able to say that she could be absent from court. To me, it's very entitled. You know, it's the idea that she shouldn't have to feel any emotional pain, or even any emotional difficulty. Of course it's going to be painful for you to hear, but that's part of life, especially when you did something like this, So I find it very much enabling of her pathology that she was allowed to not be at court. Okay, so what is the shadow part of herself? I'm coming from the perspective that I believe the jury had not only the evidence I had, but additional evidence, and I trust their decision because the evidence that I have includes the highly statistically significant increase in the numbers of deaths that were happening on the special care unit soon after Lucy Letby began and ceased being above the baseline rate once she was no longer working there in 2016. The fact that there is evidence of one of several modus operandi being present in all of the deaths. Air embolism, so injecting air, milk injection or overfeeding in very small infants, giving massive boluses, or injecting insulin in the most forensically toxicological clear cases, wherein infants had been hypoglycemic, found to have been injected with insulin despite no one on the entire unit even needing insulin, and there not being the increase in C-peptide that you would see if the body was making that insulin and cleaving it. You would see the C-peptide product from the natural insulin. This is the kind of thing we actually learn in medical school, how to tell when there's surreptitious insulin versus not. But I feel like it's something we not many of us actually see. Not many of us have to use C-peptide levels to figure out if the insulin was injected. Maybe they do in endocrinology, but I don't. But I remember it. So taking all of that as saying that I am confident that the jury made the right decision and she is guilty, what can I say confidently about the shadow self? It's a part of her that wanted to inflict pain and suffering. She seemed to want to inflict physical pain on the infants, but more so emotional pain on the parents. And I think I have to say, when I look at this part in particular, I'll never have children or marry. I'll never know what it's like to have a family. And combine that with the fact that the prosecutor in the case, when he came up with 12 common themes that united all of the infant murders or attempted murders. One of the common themes was that the incidents, the deteriorations of the infants, all tended to happen soon after a family visit. So one consideration in what's driving the darkest parts of Lucy Letby is envy. I do believe envy is one of the most destructive forces in the world. It's externally destructive and internally destructive. So the psychoanalyst Melanie Klein talked a lot about envy, and she actually believed that this was an inborn aggressive drive, and so she often studied infants and talked about these processes as starting in infancy. And so she would say that the envious person would rather destroy the good than remain helplessly dependent on it. And Wilfred Bion expanded upon that, said that envy motivates not only the destruction of the desired object, but also the part of the mind that even desires it. You want to destroy that as well. So with Lucy Letby, she sees these families coming in, visiting their infants. Even before being on the intensive care unit, she had been seeing happy families on the other neonatal wards. She'd just been moved to the special care unit, but she'd been delivering healthy babies for a while. She'd probably seen happy families coming on the happiest day of their life, seeing their babies. At some point, I suspect that some envy may have been entering into the picture. I don't know what drove that. Was there a failed relationship that she felt she had lost all hope for a family and that's what started it? Was it just always there? Was it this obsessive envy of good things happening to other people always? Don't know. But what this would have motivated was the destruction of the family unit. And that's what she achieved, and she seemed to gloat over the destruction of the family unit when we consider that she was looking up on Facebook numerous times the parents who had lost children at her hands. She was not only looking them up on Facebook in the days after the infants had died, but even much later, like on the anniversary of the infant's death. If envy was behind this, I think that she was getting a sick sort of pleasure from seeing what they were posting at these times, right? In males, there's this phenomenon of the incel killer. We have this notion now of the stereotypical incel killer, like Elliot Rodger, the spree killer in Southern California, who I would say was motivated by his envy, actually, of romantic relationships. So here are some quotes from Elliot Rodger. I'm 22 years old, never even kissed a girl. It's been very torturous. An existence of loneliness, rejection, and unfilled desires. On the day of retribution, I'm going to enter the hottest sorority house at UCSB, and I will slaughter every single spoiled, stuck-up blonde inside there. All those girls I've desired so much. So what he's motivated by is envy. He wants something so badly, he can't have it, and so he destroys them, right? I would even speculate that the Zodiac killer, when you consider the early targets, the initial targets of the Zodiac killers were couples on lovers' lanes, right? There were couples in parked cars at a location where couples were known to go and make out, etc. And then another couple, when he was at a lake and there was a couple canoodling on a blanket and he murdered them. We don't know who the Zodiac killer is, but just his victim profile, I would say, especially those first victims, he then maybe just acquired a taste for murder and did some opportunistic ones like the cab driver. But I believe his motivation was envy as well. And that kind of targeting, to me, speaks to the problem being a lack of intimacy. That's why I don't love the word incel, because I feel like incel makes it all about sex, when even Elliot Rodger, if you watch some of his videos, he's going to parks and he's talking about how he wishes he could bring a girl there. He's not purely talking about physical intimacy. He's talking about intimacy as a whole. That's what he wants so badly. And that's what most people want. We're not that complicated, but we're more complicated than just wanting sex, So the problem is the lack of intimacy and then the envy about it. That's the real problem, the envy about it. I mean, consider that the Ten Commandments, one of the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not covet, which really means envy. So whether you believe that was divinely inspired or not, I would say at least for thousands of years, humanity has had the notion that envy is one of the big no-nos. It's in the top 10 historical no-nos. Don't envy, it's destructive. So I'm proposing that's part of it. Envy over the happy families, perhaps also a reason she went after twins and triplets in particular. Perhaps it seemed particularly unfair that these new families were going to jump to having multiple children, wherein she has none. She has not even a romantic partner, other than the married doctor. So she and this pediatrician had a relationship that seemed to be going beyond work, at least was to the level of overnight trips to London and flirty text messages. However, he had a wife and family himself, who she was also Facebooking multiple times, which makes you wonder if that in itself is a source of envy that was then getting applied to these other families. If she was seeing these other families as if they were her secret boyfriend's wife and kids. I don't think it's merely that. I actually think it's bigger than that, but perhaps it was exacerbated by her specific envy of his family, jealousy of his family. I do think a secondary motive was the idea of getting to play God while simultaneously playing house with this secret doctor boyfriend in particular. So when she injects an infant with air or milk or insulin and calls a code and knows that this secret boyfriend doctor is going to be rushing to her aid, she gets to be, for that period, enacting this ultimate family drama of she and this man, doctor, huddling around this infant, trying to save it from the jaws of death. For that moment, they are themselves a sort of family unit in the height of an adrenaline situation. Here we have in another chaotic appearing note indications that someone was a best friend and she considered she loved him. She could also then certainly play the damsel in emotional distress kind of role with this doctor who knew that she was going through these hard times in his mind, struggling with the fallout of having lost yet another tenuous infant under her care, and yet him seeing how hard she was working at these resuscitations. And the damsel in distress role brings me back to borderline personality disorder. Have you seen these archetypes? So Christina Ann Lawson was a PhD who has a book about understanding the borderline mother. And so she laid out these 4 archetypes: the queen, the witch, the hermit, and the waif. The idea of that is that each of these are a sort of mode that can fit with the emotional needs of borderline personality disorder, but are going to be determined by, certain individual differences. Some people are just more likely to be in one of these archetypal modes, but also you can switch between these modes. So your mood at a given time, a better mood might lead someone with BPD to be acting in the sort of haughty, queen-like way, making decisions, directing her subjects, but, at times being a sort of benevolent queen. The witch is similarly in the powerful mode, but is now sadistic rather than the sort of haughty but demure queen. Then there's the hermit that's just going into that isolation mode or hibernation mode, staying in the house, or staying in robes, right? And there's the waif, who is the helpless, distressed, poor, the kind of person that, can really get people to rally around them, especially people with a sort of savior complex, like doctors. So the waif mode, I think, was in fact a useful means of manipulation in Lucy Letby's case. And I suspect that her relationship with this doctor included her going into this waif mode when she needed attention from him, while at the same time getting to intermittently demonstrate her competence at least attempting resuscitation. Of course, the witch mode, acting like a witch, almost a fairy tale kind of witch, but horrifyingly in real life, would seem to be the mode that she was in when she was inflicting lethal harm on the infants and emotional harm on the family unit. Deeply vengeful ways, right? Witches feel a white-hot rage, act out in deeply vengeful ways. So let's go back to the splitting. So she has these modes that she goes into, but in her mind, she has this extreme compartmentalization where the other parts of herself barely acknowledge that the witch exists. For the most part, it's completely out of her mind, except when she goes into that mode, and when she's in that mode, the other parts of her don't need to exist. So she goes through her normal life, acting probably sort of queenly, like she's a conscientious, queenly nurse. Occasionally something sets off her rage. Perhaps it's a family visit. Perhaps it's seeing a family that appears very happy. That's speculation, but that's what would generally lead to the most envy. So the more beautiful and good something is, the more she wants to destroy it with that envious rage. So my thought is that's what sets her into the witch mode, and then she plays God, makes that decision, unleashes that wrath, and then when it's over, she walls that back off, goes back into her regular life. Her friends have no idea that she's capable of harboring such an intense, envious rage. Because what they see oftentimes is the waif or the queen. She may also be a hermit sometimes, but other people wouldn't see that, right? Yeah, it's an awful case. I don't know if I can keep talking about it any longer. So these notes also have the appearance of almost vomiting out these emotional states that have otherwise been walled off in the shadows. So the witch in the shadows has been otherwise walled off, but occasionally something in reality reminds the other parts of her that the witch has done something. And so in those times, she has to vomit out the feelings that are coming from that conflict, from that internal conflict. And so it comes out as this mess of emotions, very negative emotions. She can't hold them in here. And so that's what leads to this kind of hypergraphia. You see this, at least anecdotally, you see this in BPD. In research, they say you see hypergraphia, which is so obsessive writing like this. You see that in the temporolimbic personality, which is sort of at the intersection of multiple things. You can look up temporolimbic personality, but I think the reason it shows up in borderline personality disorder is when there is this internal conflict with overwhelming emotions that cannot be maintained in the current mental structures that the person has. So they have to vomit them out like this. And again, being confronted with the parts of the self, the witch in the shadow that has been walled off, is so deeply distressing, because it's the whole reason they had to split it off in the first place was because of distress. So anything that you do to remind them of the bad parts of themselves is going to lead to a breakdown of some sort. All right. I think that's what I've got about Lucy Letby, because I need to compartmentalize my emotional states. All right. Thank you.